Happy New Year, everybody, and welcome back to The Conversation Weekly. We've got a slightly different kind of episode for you to kick off 2025, a look ahead at what to expect from the world of science in the coming year. The Conversation now has 9 editions around the world, and at each one of them, the science editors are constantly talking to experts about new research, possible breakthroughs, and different trends in scientific thought. So we invited 3 of these editors onto a panel to discuss what science and technology could have in store for us this year. I'm Gemma Ware, and this is The Conversation Weekly, the world explained by experts. For this special episode, I'm joined by 3 wonderful science editors from different editions of The Conversation around the world. Signe Dean, we're starting with you because you're ahead of us in time. You're the furthest around the world, and you're the science editor at The Conversation in Australia, based in Melbourne. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and good evening.
And next, going anti-clockwise around the world closer to me, is Elsa Couderc, who's one of the science editors at The Conversation in France, based in Paris. Bienvenue, Elsa.
Bonjour, everyone. Lovely to be with you all.
Great to have you. And finally, Paul Rincon, you're the science editor for The Conversation in the UK, based like me in London. Welcome to this grey morning.
Thanks very much for having me on. It is very grey. You're right.
Yeah, as you'd expect for London. So I've gathered you all here today to talk about what we can expect from the world of science and technology in 2025. And we're going to be covering a whole range of different sciences, areas of potential breakthroughs and exploration and hopes for science in the future. So let's start perhaps with a topic that's touching pretty much everything and every part of our lives nowadays, which is artificial intelligence. Signe, let's start with you. When it comes to the capabilities of AI, before we talk about what's coming next, can you tell us right now where we are in terms of what the world's best AI can actually do?
Yeah, well, that's a huge question, isn't it? What I don't like about talking about AI is that everyone just lumps everything into this big label AI when it actually means so many different things. So the most useful thing I've heard on how to think about AI is to think about what it can do. So its abilities. Are they more narrow or are they more general? And when researchers say general AI, what they mean is something that's more similar to how humans think and act. Our intelligence is general intelligence, and the holy grail in artificial intelligence for some people would be to develop a general AI that's as good as a person or maybe even better at just everything. Chatbots, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, things like that are really impressive because they are actually approaching that sort of general level because they can learn, they can do things that they haven't been programmed to do, as opposed to the really narrow AIs that we have had for, some would say decades. There's artificial intelligences that are controlling traffic lights in cities. There's so many little algorithms and narrow approaches, but some of them are exceeding what people can do. So I think when we think about AI, it's also good to just remember that it's a big landscape. It's not just 1 or 2 tools. It's a big thing.
Okay. What can we expect then to happen in 2025? What should people look for?
I think the one thing that I've heard from experts to look out for next year, because we've, of course, seen this massive commercialization of all the AI tools, is so-called agentic AI or AI agents. And this means that these tools that we've already been interacting with are now being developed in such a way that they can act somewhat independently to varying degrees. So, for example, you can get Claude Sonnet to go into your emails, open the inbox and do things independently. So agentic AI, I think, is going to be a big buzzword that we're going to be hearing about next year.
Okay. Paul, how might we see more AI-enabled projects then in our day-to-day lives, do you think, in the coming year?
Yeah, I mean, there's progress towards what I would say is a combination of AI and robotics. So, perhaps we're not going to see humanoid robots in the home just yet, but there's progress towards that. For example, Tesla has unveiled its humanoid robot called Optimus, and that's quite advanced. There's some good video of it using AI to basically navigate quite steep slopes, which has been a problem for humanoid type robots in the past.
Going up a hill.
Going uphill, yeah, and going downhills, yeah. So we're likely to see I would guess, AI incorporated into robots a lot more. But I think longer term, what we're going to see, certainly in Optimus and there are other various robotics companies working on humanoid and non-humanoid robots, is AI combined with robotics to have useful robots that can interact with humans in a much more realistic and useful way. And I think that's the way that some of that is going. AI agents are going to, as Signe was saying, are going to be incredibly useful for kind of computer-based tasks. Robots combined with AI can actually do physical tasks potentially in the home and outside it. You could have a situation where, not too far off, a car plant is entirely run by AI agent technology, for example, that you take the humans straight out of it, and we're going in that direction already with some manufacturing. And, another area, of course, is self-driving cars. We've had this incredible experiment in San Francisco, which is being rolled out to other US cities with two companies, Waymo and Cruise, where you've essentially got robo-taxis that pick you up, drop you off at your destination and don't have a driver. And I think we'll see progress towards fully autonomous driving cars that can pretty much do everything without an intervention from a human. Tesla, again, has unveiled its Cybercab, which it says is going in that direction, and that'll be online by about 2027.
Okay, so humanoid robots helping us with our daily tasks, a cyber taxi helping us get from A to B. What about the use of AI in actually doing scientific research? What can we expect on that front?
Well, there was the big development this year where two of the people from DeepMind won the chemistry Nobel for their development of AlphaFold 2, which essentially cracked this long-standing problem in biology of accurately predicting the shapes of proteins. It's not perfect yet, but it was a huge development and there'll be further refinements on that. And that opens up huge opportunities for medical science designing more effective medicine for humans. One of the areas that people are exploring with AlphaFold and other AI tools is the development of new antibiotics that could beat antibiotic resistance, which is a huge problem around the world. There are all kinds of applications. DeepMind, again, has put out a tool for predicting the properties of materials. It's called GNOME, and it can detect whether crystalline structures are stable, whether they're a goer, essentially. Crystalline materials are of huge opportune use in, for example, photovoltaic cells, which are used to collect solar energy in solar panels. So designing new materials, designing new medicines, there are so many offshoots from tools like AlphaFold. And we'll see all kinds of developments in terms of scientific discovery. Could you get to a point where AI tools are doing even more of the scientific heavy lifting in the lab in terms of analyzing the results, even writing papers based on those results? That's something for the future, perhaps, but I think we'll definitely see lots of steps in that direction.
I'm sure people will have their own questions about that direction in science too, what it means. Elsa, what about you? What are you looking out for in AI developments in the coming year?
So where we're going next with AI, and this might not be for next year, but AI has very many different approaches, as Signe said. And two of them are symbolic AI and connectionist AI. So essentially, large language models such as ChatGPT work on statistics. They're symbol words that make sense, but they don't actually do the reasoning behind it. They don't really know what they mean. The symbolic branch of AI is building, for example, world models that brings meaning into what they do. And people are now trying to hybridize both branches so that we can have very powerful language models that actually have a logic behind what they say. So that's one thing to watch. And on the application side in science, one application they're working on is early warning for tsunamis and earthquakes. AI could help working out the signals that we receive, seismic signals, much faster, so that we could tell the local population that they need to hide or flee, etc.
So Elsa, some of the big headlines about AI are a super intelligent AI that's going to destroy humanity. I guess there are questions there about how politicians, how people who aren't in science deal with AI, aren't there? That we're going to come across in 2025.
Absolutely. Even before the destruction of humanity, there are a few problems along the road, which is normal with any emerging technology. You know, it's a double-edged sword. But I'll definitely be watching closely the regulation side, because many of the law and tech experts I talk to tell me there's no way we can do this on a smaller scale than global scale, just because if you regulate on one side of the world, but you don't on the other side, companies might just move across to be able to do what they want to do. So yeah, I do hope we're going to see a start of the discussion on a global scale. Various organizations, the UN, for example, have started that. But that's going to be one of the things I'm interested in 2025.
Okay, let's move on to something a bit further away from home, space. Signe, what's coming up in the world of space exploration in 2025?
Well, I was really excited to talk about the moon mission that NASA has been working on for a while. But as we were preparing for this podcast, NASA announced that they have yet another delay on the Artemis program. So Artemis 2 is the program where eventually they're hoping to put boots back on the moon, which would be the first time in a very long time. But now there's been a slight delay. So we likely can't expect any people to go up into space next year in relation to the Artemis mission. And the same, unfortunately, is true of India's first ever crewed mission they've been working on, called the Gangayaan program. They also were hoping to launch some people into space, which would be the first time ever India has done so, launching a crew into space. And now that's also pushed to 2026.
Oh, wow.
Now, what is happening next year? Space is always quite unpredictable because things get delayed, they get pushed back, we get excited. But in terms of what's planned and what I think probably will happen on schedule is China's Tianwen-2 program. So China's space exploration program in recent years has come from strength to strength. They have landed a Mars rover. They successfully brought back samples from the far side of the moon with Chang'e 6. They've just been really on the ball with it, which is not surprising when it's a different type of funding model and it's a different type of approach to how you're going to do space exploration. They've really been hitting it hard. And so Tianwen-2, which is hopefully going to launch in May 2025, is going to be China's first asteroid sample return. We've had a few asteroid sample returns before, but this is the first one for China. So that's an possibly exciting launch in May. And of course, it will take quite a few years to then get that sample back, which is always the case. And then it takes them a few more years to analyze it. But eventually we'll get some more knowledge about asteroids. Also, that's not a space launch necessarily, but and it's actually kind of sad. NASA's Juno mission, the probe that's been orbiting Jupiter for years and years and years now, sending us incredible data, incredible images of Jupiter and all the moons. That's likely to end in September 2025.
So farewell to Juno.
It's had a great run. It's been a very successful mission, but that's going to be quite sad. I remember when the probe that was going around Saturn, when that burnt up, and they made this really heartbreaking documentary about saying goodbye to it. So it looks like we're going to be saying goodbye to Juno this year.
But it's not just government states that are going to space nowadays, is it? There are commercial space flights and commercial companies who are really getting into this race. What can we expect from the likes of Elon Musk's SpaceX, which is kind of the big player in this industry?
True. So SpaceX has a hugely ambitious target next year. They're hoping to do more than 150 Falcon 9 launches, which is, if you count the days in the year, that's very ambitious. Also, what's interesting is that, and it's also in collaboration with SpaceX, we might see the first ever launch of a commercial space station. Now, this is being developed by a US company called VAST, and that might happen in August. But then, as I said earlier, space usually is delays. So we'll see how that all goes. One other thing, to the dismay of astronomers everywhere, is private companies will keep launching loads and loads of comms satellites, those little ones that make constellations and then make internet really accessible in difficult to reach areas. Notably, Amazon's going to launch more than 3,000 satellites. So don't know how I feel about that, to be honest.
Busy skies.
Eventually, we won't be able to see anything.
I know all of you follow these commercial space companies quite a lot, don't you? Does anyone else have any thoughts about where we're going with that side of things this year?
What Trump and Elon Musk do with NASA is going to be a very big story next year. And during the first Trump administration, it took him a while to actually appoint a head of NASA. He's not taken office yet, and we've already got one this year, Jared Isaacman, who's a close ally of Elon Musk. So that may give us some indications of the direction they're going to go in. Elon Musk has been brought in to also cut billions of dollars potentially from the federal budget. And, he has obviously his views on space. He's a big advocate of Mars, but the US is engaged, as Signe was saying, in this effort to put humans on the moon for the first time since 1972. And they're in a race of sorts with China, which says that it's going to put humans on the moon by 2030. Now, we haven't got a lot of time if the Trump administration wants to make major changes. And whether it matters or not that the US gets to the moon before China this century. I mean, as one NASA administrator said once, you can only get to the moon first once. But I think if China gets there before the US, I think that will be quite a significant event, let's say. And not everyone, perhaps in the US space community, will see that as a win for America.
Beyond the space race going back to the moon and these new missions that we might see in 2025, there are obviously lots of ongoing experiments, research missions that are already up in space doing their thing. Paul, are we watching out for some news from those? I think there's something expected from Mars in 2025, right?
Yeah, that's right. So NASA's robot rover Perseverance has been exploring Mars for a few years now. It was dropped into a location called Jezero Crater, which was effectively an ancient lake billions of years ago. And it's been exploring the crater floor and actually drilling samples of rocks, interesting rocks that it finds on the way, and leaving them for a mission which may or may not happen at some point in the next 10 years or so, called Mars Sample Return. So that's a whole different story. But it's now making its way up to the edge of the crater, where it wants to explore exposed rocks from basically the ancient crust of Mars. And the idea is that billions of years ago, Mars may have been a habitable environment, much more hospitable to life than it is today. It's pretty much a desert with even bacterial life would struggle to survive on the surface. But billions of years ago, there was water on the surface. We think it may have been more hospitable in other ways in terms of the atmosphere as well. So it wants to explore the rocks that were laid down at these ancient times to find out whether life ever got started on Mars and whether it can find evidence of that life if it's there. Now, it's making its way up. It's going to have to navigate these steep slopes of potentially about 23 degrees, which is quite steep for one of these robot rovers to navigate. They don't want to get stuck in the same way that Spirit, which was landed at the beginning of the millennium, got stuck in a kind of sand trap. And they don't want anything like that to happen to this rover. So they'll be very careful, and they've planned out the route already. But it's making its way to a location called Witch Hazel. And that is essentially a collection of bright rocks, which they've seen from orbit. And they think it may be linked to a particularly interesting rock that they found on the crater floor called Cheyava Falls. Now, Cheyava Falls has evidence of this kind of spotting, what they call leopard spots. Now, on Earth, these leopard spot features can be signs of chemical reactions that involve biology, involve microbial life. So they think that Witch Hazel has similar rocks, essentially, to Cheyava Falls.
Exciting.
Yeah, they're going to go off after that, look at another location where they think from orbit there are signs of hydrothermal activity. Now, this is a combination of water and heat. I mean, this is activity that happened on early Mars, ancient Mars, billions of years ago. But on Earth, you find life in combination with hydrothermal activity, energy plus water to the key ingredients for life. That may help answer some of these questions that people have about whether Mars was ever habitable. But the answers aren't going to be definitive. They might find interesting signs. The bar for claiming evidence of biology is very high. And you can't put the kinds of instruments that you need in order to definitively ID evidence of ancient life on a rover because they're too big and heavy and complicated.
Mm.
You need to bring those samples back to Earth, which leads into this Mars sample return mission that NASA's...
How you get them back.
Yeah.
I mean, and also, I guess one of the things from Perseverance is that you can see really amazing photographs from it in almost real time, can't you? On social media, I often see people posting Marscapes that were from the day before or something, which I find it's a real connection to that mission, which is great, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, some of the imagery that Perseverance has brought back from Mars is just amazing. It just really kind of encapsulates and brings to life our neighbouring planet. And I think for a lot of people, it sparked so much interest in further exploring it and potentially a human mission at some point in the future.
Elsa, there's also the European Space Agency's Euclid telescope, which was sent up in 2023, just a year after the James Webb Space Telescope. There have been some amazing images sent back from James Webb so far of faraway space. What are the hopes for Euclid?
It's essentially a cosmology mission. So it will be looking at dark matter and dark energy. So Euclid has gone quite far away from Earth, 1.5 million kilometers, and it has joined an orbit that is quite popular for space telescope. James Webb is also along that orbit because it's quite stable and it's also quite well shielded from radiation from the sun. Webb is able to look very far, very precisely. Now, Euclid is complementary. Euclid is for wide-angle view. So if you think about hiking in the mountain, you'd use the Webb to take a picture of a marmot, and you'd use Euclid to capture the whole landscape in one shot.
Okay.
You won't see as far, only up to 10 billion light years away from Earth, which is quite cool already.
Yeah, 10 billion. It's a lot.
It is brilliant, yeah. Anyway, so Euclid will use two types of cosmological probes to study dark matter and dark energy.
So it could really help answer some of these big questions that scientists still have about dark energy, what it is, how it works.
Where it is, and how it fuels the expansion of the universe. It has started sending data to the scientists that belong to the Euclid Consortium, and they're, as we speak, already unraveling the data and looking at it. The data will be made public in March, and this is when the first salve of papers will come out. One thing I wanted to mention too is that Euclid is generating 800 gigabytes of data each day, and scientists are obviously working on it, but a citizen can contribute to comb through Euclid's data with a citizen science program called Galaxy Zoo.
So if you've got a New Year's resolution to get more involved in citizen science, go search out Galaxy Zoo, everyone. Elsa, sticking with you, we'll move away from space now. Another area that you're keeping your eye on in the year ahead is this kind of science fiction-esque brain-machine interface, these technologies that can directly interact with our brains. What can we expect in terms of advances in this science in 2025?
So there are different applications with brain implants and brain-machine interface. So in 2023, a brain implant was reported to allow a paralyzed man to walk by simply thinking about it. And that was in various research institutions in Switzerland. Now, private companies are putting their weight into this, including Elon Musk's Neuralink. And they just got approval for clinical trial in Canada to test their surgery robot and a much less invasive brain implant that they've developed to move paralyzed limbs. And that's coming after they already have quite a bit of success with their US trial, which started in 2024. So definitely look for progress in brain implants that help paralyzed people move.
Mm-hmm.
And another application for brain implants is that we've seen a start at decoding thoughts. And this has been reported in 2023. For the time being, it requires willing participants and a huge MRI machine. But together with the progress on the implant side, it has led to discussion about mental privacy, because we're talking about decoding thoughts. So mental privacy, I mean, my thoughts seem instinctively so private to me that this expression didn't make sense at all when I first heard it. I
It's a
had
strange
to
one.
think so much about this. So yes, we're discussing about how private our thoughts can be. So 2025 is the year that UNESCO, the Science and Culture UN organization, should adopt a large-scale recommendation on neuro rights, including the right to mental privacy, and the ethics of neurotechnologies. And their Congress will be in November. So I expect we will be hearing a lot more about neurotech and what's at stake, what it means about being humans and how we relate to machines.
Signe, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, this neuro rights thing is really a good one to watch because some experts here in Australia have already warned about different corporations monitoring their workers as well through, for example, headsets. It doesn't necessarily have to be quite an invasive implant because just measuring brain waves, maybe we can't tell right now what the person is thinking, but the idea is that you could infer what they're feeling, how fatigued they are, etc. And those sorts of measurements, particularly in a workplace context when you're an employee, so you're essentially under the power of this corporation, also raise a lot of legal and ethical concerns. And that could lead to, for example, something like neurodiscrimination, where what if an employer can fire someone based on their brainwave data? We wouldn't want that. So the fact that the UN members are coming together and trying to establish neuro rights, it might sound very sci-fi, but we actually need that right now.
Wow. Really fascinating one to watch then for the months ahead. Let's move on to something really tiny and it's almost too difficult for us humans to understand. But 2025 has been designated the Year of Science and Quantum Technology by the UN. And that's because it marks the 100th anniversary of the birth of quantum mechanics. It is one of the biggest areas of research today in computing around quantum computing. So tell us, if you can, Paul, how we understand this development very briefly in kind of layman's terms.
Yeah, well, every description of quantum computers I've heard from scientists is slightly different, but I'll give it a go. So quantum computers are essentially machines that harness the strange laws of quantum mechanics that appear at very tiny scales. And the idea is not necessarily at the moment to have, a quantum computer instead of your laptop or your desktop computer. These are designed to crack specific problems that are very hard for conventional computers like supercomputers that we have at the moment. They're called classical computers. So the basic processing units of information in quantum computers are called qubits, and they're the counterparts of the bits that are used in classical machines. So bits store as values, they store either a 1 or a 0. And the idea is that a qubit, it's neither a 1 or a 0. It stores all the values in between a 1 and a 0, and including those. And essentially, it's a bit like a spinning coin that hasn't yet landed on a head or a tail. And because it's not a 1 or a 0, that allows quantum computers to perform many more tasks in parallel than classical computers can do. And it makes them more suitable at cracking really difficult problems that conventional computers really take a long time or struggle to do.
So where are the big breakthroughs we might expect in quantum computing research in 2025 then?
Well, I think it will continue the trends of what people were doing before, trying to break records for qubits. But I think now the trend is towards, in terms of building practical machines, you actually want to reduce the errors that quantum computers are prone to. So these qubits are very fragile in the sense that they can lose their quantumness through various means. So in December, Google came out with a new processor called Willow. And basically what Google has done is they've found a way to reduce the number of errors that occur as you increase the number of qubits. Now, they say their new processor is a step towards practical quantum computers, which is what everyone is working towards.
Elsa, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, this has led to the rise of post-quantum cryptography because much of our communication security across the world currently relies on algorithms that quantum computers could crack. So there is sort of a counter race to quantum computing, and that's quantum resistant cybersecurity.
Go on, Signe.
As a side note, I just think if the United Nations has designated next year to be the year of quantum technology and science, then maybe that is the year when we will finally be able to understand it and explain it to our friends.
Yeah. We are actually preparing an episode on quantum computing, so we'll be getting our heads around that a bit more. So keep an ear out for that, everybody. Now, another area of science and tech that's having a huge amount of money pumped into it is nuclear fusion. This is when, instead of splitting an atom to get power that we have from nuclear reactions today, scientists are trying to fuse together atoms to create energy. Long-time listeners of our podcast may remember that we actually did an episode back on this in 2022 when we learned, well, I learned just how complicated actually achieving nuclear fusion really is. Signe, where are we heading with this? Are we expecting any breakthroughs next year, in the year ahead, soon?
Yeah, so as you said, it's interesting because nuclear fusion has been 10 years away for this entire century and a good chunk of the last century. So, but there is slow and steady progress, and the money aspect is particularly interesting because that has accelerated greatly in the past few years, where nuclear fusion research is steadily moving from the public to the private sector, and also the public-private joint effort. So several $1 billion have been raised in recent years. In fact, I think the number now stands at $7.1 billion US dollars of investment. Nearly $1 billion of that was attracted just over the past year. And some of that's also public funding. So that's increased over 50% just in the last year as well. So everyone's pumping money into this, as you said, and the goal is to get us to a working fusion reactor within the next 10 years.
Still there.
Well, actually, one big milestone for late 2025, which maybe like with space research, we might have delays, is the completion of Spark. That's a nuclear fusion reactor that's going to be built by Commonwealth Fusion, which is actually a private company in Massachusetts. And their goal is to become the first commercially relevant fusion energy producer. So they want to make more energy from the fusion than it takes to power the reaction, which of course is the perpetual issue with nuclear fusion. And if that goes to plan, they are hoping to build a full-scale nuclear fusion power plant in the early 2030s. So that's less than 10 years away. We'll see how that goes, I guess.
What's the big picture then here, Elsa, if we do manage to achieve this goal of nuclear fusion?
Well, one of the big advantages of fusion is that, contrarily to fission, it will produce nuclear waste, but much lower level radioactivity and also shorter lived. So we would have much less of a waste problem than we currently have with nuclear fission.
And that's the Holy Grail, obviously. I know we've been talking a lot about physics in this episode and different technological advancements, but what progress, Elsa, do you see scientists making to help us understand our own human bodies in the year ahead? I know this is something you're thinking about.
Yeah, I find it absolutely fascinating that roughly half the cells in each of our bodies are bacteria and the other half only is human cell. That makes us really redefine what being human means. So we actually live in symbiosis with bacteria, and when the balance goes off, scientists talk about dysbiosis. And researchers have been looking at the relation between this symbiosis with our microbiota and various conditions like depression or chronic illnesses such as Crohn's disease, for example. And there are currently leading giant science efforts and advances in diagnosis, prevention, and therapies. So one nice thing about the prevention of our symbiosis with our bacteria is that it's actually aligned with planetary health recommendations. So eating better, more fibers, for example. And in 2025, we should hear more about clinical trials for some of the microbe human health strategies, for example, using microbiota-based approaches to help with blood cancer therapies. So I'm really excited about those advances, yeah.
Okay, so this is not just microbiome for your own health benefits if you're a fairly healthy person, but really helping it as a kind of a cure for certain things or a therapy.
Absolutely,
for them. Yeah. Right, everyone. To finish off, quickfire question for all of you. If there's one big question or problem that you would personally love scientists to answer or solve in 2025, what would it be? Paul, let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, for a number of years now, we've known of these separate human group called the Denisovans that lived on Earth tens of thousands of years ago, basically. The way that we found them was actually getting DNA out of a finger bone that was found in a cave, Denisova cave in Siberia. They were archaic humans that lived Central Asia, other parts of Asia, before modern humans, our species, emerged from Africa and replaced them, essentially. Almost a sister group to the Neanderthals. But, we've just got this genome, but we haven't until now had other bits of the skeleton. And I think it'll be really interesting if scientists find other, more complete examples, more complete fossils from this mysterious species. I think more progress on that.
So solve that Denisovan mystery. Elsa, what big question or problem would you love scientists to answer?
I would love a low-cost, energetically reasonable water filtering device, please. So water is a huge issue right now. There are so many issues with clean water access across the world, and this is not only, of course, in remote areas or poorer countries. Water is polluted everywhere, from microplastic to PFAS. But thankfully, there are actually people working on really cool membranes for this.
So like innovation in water tech can really save lots of lives. And finally, you, Signe, what would you love to see solved?
Oh, I have so many things I'd like to see solved. Paul already much earlier mentioned getting a robot butler, getting a self-driving car, so I don't have to try all of that. Maybe a time machine would be good.
Yeah, that would be great.
But if we can't have one of those, figuring out what makes up 80% of the universe could be a nice one. We still don't know what dark matter is, and there has to be something there, according to all the theories. And Elsa was talking about Euclid earlier. So that's going to maybe contribute to solving this problem. But yeah, it's dark matter's out there. It's making the universe expand. What is it?
Yeah, I'd love to know more about that too. So thank you, all of you, for coming on and giving us some science and tech stories to watch out for in the year ahead. I'm sure you'll all be finding academics to write about these developments as and when they happen. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That's it for this week's episode. It was produced by me, Gemma Ware, with assistance from Katie Flood and Mend Marawani. Sound design was by Michelle Macklem. Our theme music is by Nita Saal, and Stephen Kahn is our global executive editor. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, you can email us directly at podcast@theconversation.com. We'd love to hear from you. You can also sign up for The Conversation's free daily newsletter by clicking on the link in our show notes. And we'll put a link to our socials on there too. The Conversation is a non-profit news outlet dedicated to sharing the work of academic experts with a wider audience. If you like what we do, please support us at donate.theconversation.com. And please do also rate and review the podcast wherever you follow us. It really does help. Thanks for listening.